Two people can buy the exact same K-truck same year, same model, same import paperwork, and one of them ends up with a legal daily driver, while the other ends up with an expensive lawn ornament. They can't legally register. The difference has nothing to do with the truck. It's entirely about which state they live in. Last time, we compared FR and 4WD, manual and automatic, grade by grade, so you'd know exactly what to look for once you've decided to import one. Today, we're answering a question that actually matters, more than any of those specs. Can you even legally drive one where you live? Here's the assumption almost every first-time buyer makes. They assume that once federal law clears a K-truck for import, the hard part is over the truck is legal, full stop. That assumption is wrong, and it trips up more buyers than any spec sheet ever will. Federal law and state law are answering two completely different questions. The federal government only decides whether a vehicle can cross the border. Once a K-truck turns 25 years old, it's exempt from most modern American crash safety standards, and it's generally covered by a separate EPA emissions exemption. That one runs on its own, age clock, a bit earlier than the safety exemption. Either way, U.S. Customs will let it in by 25 years old. That's the rule we covered in our very first video, and it hasn't changed. But crossing the border and getting a license plate are not the same thing. Whether that truck can be titled and driven on public roads is a decision made entirely by the state you live in. And states have taken widely different approaches, from full registration to outright refusal. And here's where it gets genuinely strange. You'd assume each state independently studied K-trucks, weighed the safety data, and made its own call. For a lot of states, that's not really what happened. In 2011, an organization called AAMVA, the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, published a document called Best Practice regarding registration and titling of mini trucks. Despite the official-sounding name, AAMVA isn't a government agency. It's a private nonprofit association that writes model guidance for state DMVs to adopt if they choose to. That 2011 document recommended that member states stop registering mini trucks for road use, arguing that vehicles built to another country's safety standards shouldn't be allowed onto American roads. A number of states adopted language that traces almost directly back to it. Then in 2021, AAMVA went further. A follow-up guidance document, put together with input from a handful of state DMVs, extended the same logic to K-class vehicles specifically, and even swept in things like vintage military Jeeps, arguing that any vehicle never built to meet U.S. federal motor vehicle safety standards was, by definition, too unsafe to register. States that had never thought twice about K-trucks suddenly had a template sitting on their desk, telling them exactly how to ban them. That's the part almost nobody importing a K-truck ever finds out. A lot of the patchwork of state bans didn't come from 50 separate safety investigations. In many of the strictest states, a large part of the reasoning traces back to that same private association's recommendation, adopted to different degrees at different times. Though it's not the whole story everywhere. Some states leaned more on their own review or insurer input. Still, AAMVA's template shows up, often enough in similar language across enough unrelated states, that it's clearly one of the biggest single threads running through this patchwork. So, what does the map actually look like today? Roughly speaking, every state falls into one of three groups, though the exact count in each group shifts as legislation moves. One smaller group places no key-specific restriction on road use at all. Register it like any other vehicle. Drive it on any public road. A larger group allows registration, but caps where you can drive it. Usually a posted speed limit. Ceiling, commonly somewhere between 35 and 55 miles per hour, and typically no interstate access. And a third group simply won't title or register a K-truck at all, treating it the same as any vehicle that fails to meet modern federal safety standards. Texas is the clearest example of a state that flipped categories entirely. For years, Texas explicitly listed mini trucks and K-class vehicles in its own vehicle. Title manual as ineligible for registration, written into official state paperwork twice. Owners and advocacy groups spent years pushing back. In April 2024, the Texas DMV reversed course, making K-trucks street legal statewide with standard registration, and unusually for this category, access to Texas highways, not just local roads. That's not a free-for-all posted minimum speeds. and a truck's real-world top speed can still rule certain roads out in practice. Still, it's now one of the most frequently cited key truck legal states in the country, and it got there because people successfully challenged the assumption that the ban was permanent. Other states show the opposite pattern or something stranger. Alabama technically allows mini trucks to be titled, but under state law. They have to be fitted with a speed governor, a physical device, not a political office that caps them at 25 miles an hour, slower than most city arterial roads, which makes the legal label almost meaningless in practice. Minnesota doesn't set a statewide rule at all. State law hands the entire decision down to individual counties and cities, so a key truck can be perfectly legal in one town and banned 2 miles away in the next township over. And Maine, which halted new key truck registrations back in 2023, didn't just leave the door shut. It created a formal working group to study the issue, which delivered its findings in early 2026, and now has a follow-up bill sitting in the legislature that could reopen the door, depending on what lawmakers do with that report. Here's something worth knowing if you're cross-referencing lists online. A lot of casual which states are key truck. Legal articles blur the line between fully legal and restricted. States like Virginia and Alabama get listed as simply legal in a lot of places, when in reality, they only allow key trucks as low-speed vehicles capped well under highway speeds. A real restriction, not a technicality. If a list doesn't mention a speed cap or a road class limit, that's usually a sign it's oversimplified, not a sign the state has no restriction at all. One thing holds true almost everywhere. K trucks are allowed on the road at all. Interstate highways are largely off the table, not because of a single federal rule banning them there, but because each state's own registration. Class and traffic law caps key trucks at a speed well under highway speed, or a highway's minimum speed rule rules them out, even without saying no interstates outright. Texas is the clear outlier. Having opened highway access alongside everything else in 2024, practically speaking, most key truck owners wouldn't want sustained highway speed for hours anyway. These trucks were built for narrow roads and short hauls, and this landscape keeps moving in both directions, sometimes within the same year. A state that bans key trucks today isn't necessarily going to ban them next year, and a state that allows them today isn't guaranteed to keep allowing them either. Advocacy groups have pushed successful legalization efforts in multiple states in just the past couple of years, while other states have gone the opposite direction and started revoking registrations that were already issued. Vermont is a recent example of just how fast that momentum can move. As of this year, a bill defining mini trucks in state law and directing the state DMV to register them made its way through both chambers of the Vermont legislature, a state that not long before had followed the same AAMVA-influenced restrictions as most of its neighbors. Advocacy groups organized, showed up at the State House, and the state's position changed. Same pattern as Texas, just a few years later and in a much smaller state. Neither happened automatically, both took organized pressure, pushing back on a default position, copied from state to state for over a decade. If you're seriously planning to import one, the only way to know where you actually stand is to check your own state's current DMV guidance directly, not a forum post, not a compiled list from a year ago, including the one in this video. Here's a detail worth understanding from the seller's side of this, since I run a used car export business myself. When a K truck leaves Japan, our responsibility ends at getting it correctly documented, inspected, and shipped the auction sheet, the export certificate, the paperwork U.S. Customs will ask for at the port. What happens after it clears the port, whether your state will actually title, it isn't something a Japanese dealer or exporter can promise you, no matter how confident the listing sounds. Serious importers ask their state's question before they ever ask which grade or which generation to buy. That order matters. So if you're planning to import a K truck, the real first question isn't which model, which generation, or which grade to choose. It's whether your own state will let you put a plate on it once it arrives, and increasingly, whether that answer traces back to your state's own judgment or to a private association's recommendation from over a decade ago that your state adopted without much of a fight. Next time, we're looking at the messier side of importing, real trouble stories from buyers who got the paperwork wrong and exactly how to avoid repeating their mistakes.